Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of my game art analysis series of tutorials. Today I'm going to be looking at the game Final Fantasy IX, and I'm going to be looking at a lot of the environment concept art for the game. Typically, when people look at concept art for Final Fantasy specifically, they look at Yoshitaka Amano's illustrations and concept design, character designs, or even some of the environment stuff he's done. I am aware that he has done, most of the art and most of the aesthetic for the Final Fantasy games. But this is mostly going to be focused on the art that other people on the team did. At least I believe Yoshitaka Amano did not do all of the environment designs we're going to look at today. But I wanted to start it off with this awesome painting of his. This is an example of something that an artist would do probably later in the game production as a way to um, as a promotional piece of work that would probably be released with the game itself, but also is something that was used to help capture the mood for the team. It may have been used as something as like a piece of inspiration, but it does look like the characters are already designed. So I would imagine this is the result of already have the game has already been in production whenever he did this illustration. Um, these are some of the character designs it is that he did. And obviously, what's interesting about his work is that the character designs he does, the characters that they put into the game, I mean, they they take inspiration from it, but I imagine it would be very difficult to capture kind of the vibe that he creates with his watercolors in in a way um, that is doable in a game engine, right? Like some of his stuff is very abstract, and it's very interesting because he's very similar to Yoji Shinkawa, and that he's known as this rock star artist. But a lot of the stuff it is that people attribute, or a lot of the stuff that people love about his work is not even really game concept art. A lot of it's just illustrations or they're standalone images like this, but they're not actually useful for a production pipeline of a game. So now we're going to go ahead and turn our attention towards some of the other stuff it is that was produced for Final Fantasy IX for the environments. And I have about five different pieces it is that I want to look at. And we're going to look at the way it is that they tell their story through the environments that they've designed here. So, I'm somebody who hasn't played Final Fantasy IX in quite a while. So if you know the details of the story or you want to share anything in the comments, feel free to. I'm looking at this from the perspective of somebody who hasn't played this game in a long, long time, probably 10 years. But it almost doesn't really matter. I don't know the details of the story, but there's a lot of storytelling elements that are going on in this environment that are easily communicated to the viewer immediately upon looking at it. And I think that that is something that anybody who's doing game dev, if you're an independent game developer and you are doing some art for your game, looking at the concept art, the environment concept art for some of these older games and seeing how they tell the story is is pretty useful. And I think there's a lot of pre-production work it is that you need to do before you even get to the point of doing something like this, which is that you could imagine that the, let me just start a blank page here. You know, if we look at the concept art piece, if we take it and we pull it over here, we can begin to list out some different things, right? And we can get an idea of like what was their thinking, right? So this room has clockwork in it, gears, a bell. So this is some sort of a clock tower. What else is going on here? There's clothes. Hold on. Oops. Give me 1 second here. All right. So let's list out the different elements that are in this image, and we can begin to kind of reverse engineer some different things. So what do we see? We see gears. We see um, we get this idea that we're in a clock tower. It we see clothes. So somebody's living here. Clothes. We see beds. All right, let's zoom in on this bed here and see what we see. So we see a bed. We see a fan here, right? Looks like some sort of a poster behind of the king, right? A light, a lamp here with some booze bottles sprinkled about. We see some maps here of some environment. See a little mouse hidden up here, right? You could almost go through this whole area and count all the different things it is that you see. We see a table. What do we see on the table? We see playing cards. We see more alcohol. We see another lamp. And this is, I've got a lot of visual storytelling going on. And guess where it's positioned next to? It's positioned next to this bell here. We see some swords. We see what looks like other maps, treasure chest, keys, valve, a telescope, another poster, boxes with cargo in it, pipes that are ill-fitted with something, and then books. Quill. All right. So we have clothes, alcohol, playing cards, posters, books. So what does all these different elements, telescope, what are all these different elements tell us about what's going on in this environment? Well, obviously, we are being told by all the different aspects of this environment that there is some sort of a character that lives in here that has potentially an authority, I guess you could say a maintenance role, like maybe the maintenance man lives here, right? Like again, when we think of maintenance, we think of gears, we think of things being fixed, and then we look at the actual structures of the room, and some of it looks like it's put together very well, and then some of it looks like it's barely being held together by these different wedges and things, right? Like something like this looks very strange, right? But it's also connected. See, that's what's interesting about it. Look how much thought they put into this. There's a gear that's underneath here that's churning this table, which is interesting enough, but it's turning another gear, and sandwiched in between that is another gear that is connected to this that's going here, that's being churned here by this gear, and it goes up and it goes over and it turns the fan. I mean, it's kind of hilarious um, because it feels so contrived. Like, why don't you just have this attached to like one gear, bro? Why do you got it attached to all this nonsense over here? So, and then we see the clothes here, and we see that's turned on a gear, right? So anywhere it is that they could put the gears, even using a gear as basically a table, right? And then there's a gear here, and like what is it turning? It's turning these books. That's just madness, right? But obviously the person in this room is some sort of a maintenance man because he has keys And maybe he's also kind of voyeuristic because he has this telescope here. And maybe he's a little bit of a drunk, and him and his friends are, well, apparently there's two people that are here because we have two beds. And these guys are alcoholics, or maybe it's a couple. And they like to play cards and shoot the shit while they wait on getting called for whatever it is that they need to do. And notice that all these different points of visual interest are all kind of around in the circumference of this area. So if the player is walking around here, he can go up here and maybe there's some details they can investigate. Probably not. Maybe there's a detail here, right? And maybe there's a detail over here because there's a treasure chest. So they can walk over here and they're going to see these different visual elements and potentially interact with them. So these are different points of interest for the player to look. But the main focal point in this environment is very obvious, and that is where we have the most contrast, just like in any illustration. Where is the majority of the contrast? It's here. It's between these 2 points because you have this bell that is on a white background, and then you have this table with all this junk and clutter on it that immediately draws our eye to it. So as the player comes in here, more than likely they're going to know this is where I need to go. Oh, I see a treasure chest over here. Let me go over here and get this, and then come back around and go here. Right? So moving on, we can look at these environment designs and we can notice, quite a few different things. For one, the artists on this game had a master level understanding of not just architectural design, but just perspective drawing in general. And I'm curious if this was this was back in what, the early 2000s or maybe even 98, 99 when they were doing these designs. Um, what was the was this done on paper or was this done on digitally? Because the level of detail and the level of finish is pretty incredible. Here I get this idea that this might be in a similar location to what it is that we were looking at before, because we see this repeating pattern of gears, right? So this is probably connected to a city, and we see that throughout everything. There's this kind of handmade kind of quality to everything, like things have been this it's kind of a medieval fantasy, but then there's kind of like this kind of steampunkish kind of element to it with these pipes coming out of the building. And you can see that everything has this kind of function to it, right? Like all the different elements has like a function to it. Like this is some sort of an exhaust. Same thing here. Like what is this? Like a water well or something? Um, we see something similar here. Like what is this supposed to be? Is this supposed to be like an extension of this telescope? Right? Same thing here. Lots of detail and lots of visual interest around a spot where a player could go in, right? So I get the sense that I can go into this place. I don't really get the sense that I can go into this place. I probably can, but it also feels like there's so little detail here in the architecture compared to this area that I feel like this is the area that the game developer wants me to explore, while this is more just like a background prop, right? And I'm also clued in on what this area might be linked to, because it's not completely clear to me if these two buildings are connected to one another. They may not be. It may just be the perspective, but I do see that there is a door here. And from this door, there's a bridge. So there's a whole nother area over here that the game is telling me that I can potentially go into, right? I also like that there's always this escalating stairs, and then there's a regular walk and then more stairs. and everything is kind of vertical, but it's also vertical and it's going around, right? So not everything is like this straight line. Like things are built on a path that has some curve to it, that has some interest to it. When we look at an environment design like this, there's a couple of things that we can notice about what the artists are communicating to us with this piece if we compare it to this, right? We can look at just the designs of, say, this building here, and there's a number of different things that we can notice. There's obvious differences, but the most clear is that this is something that has been built by the citizens of this city and has been upkeep by the citizens of this city, and perhaps you could say in an imperfect condition. By that I mean there's a lot of asymmetrical elements to it in the design. This here, the booze bottles hanging around the front, the sign selling booze. These lights are symmetrical. They're on either side, but this one has a bunch of pots around it, right? And this area up here, it's also quite interesting the way it is that they did that. But let me go and take a look at this now. Notice that this castle shot, everything in the environment is perfectly symmetrical, right? So symmetry is something it is that you want to use sparingly whenever you're doing your environment designs. If this castle was, if this scene was set in the future, or if this was a different game and it was taking place in like say a castle that had been destroyed, we wouldn't we wouldn't walk into an environment that was symmetrical like this, right? So symmetry seems to suggests royalty. It suggests perfection. It suggests wealth, opulence. Whenever you go into an opulent place, you see a lot of symmetrical shapes and a lot of symmetrical designs. And just in the same way it is that we look at a character design and we can look at it and we can basically draw a square and you can say like the bottom leg is this ratio, the middle, and then you have the top. Like maybe the top of the character is the highest ratio of a character, right? So like we look at the character design here, he's got a bigger head than the rest of his body, right? If you've played the game, you know what I'm saying. My point is we can see the same sort of concept going on here in the environment, right? The the ceiling part, this ceiling part up here, this area versus this area versus this area, right? So you could say medium, small, trim, and then big. And this is something to consider whenever it is that you're doing your environment designs. And it's something I see in a lot of uh, game developers is that the environment designs are just not really that interesting to look at because a lot of the times, not because there isn't a bunch of crazy designs, but just because the geometry isn't broken up, right? There's obvious visual motifs that are very similar to what we were talking about before. You have these circles, and this is kind of repeating in these doorways, and those are very much a contrasting element. See, there's still contrast, even though there's symmetry. There's still contrast, right? So we have this symmetry, which is very rectangular and very straight, right? Very straight, very rectangular. And then we have these arches as basically as like the contrasting elements to to the rest of the drawing. Whereas again, even on the textures on the floor, everything is very straight, straight lines, straight lines, straight lines, right? And then we have curves here, curve here, oops, curve here, curve on the base of these, right? And in the pillars themselves, there's curves. In the door here, which is a main point of interest, there's curves, right? So there's this balance between straights and curves throughout the design. And there's a balance between big, medium, and small shapes, right? We could imagine that the design of this would be very different if the red if this carpet that he's walking on was the same size all the way down. If it was like this, and you had these lines coming out here like this, would it be as visually appealing? No, I don't think so. I think part of the appeal is this huge space it is that the character is sitting in. And it gives it a sense because there's kind of this negative space around the character, it makes him feel small compared to the rest of all this opulence around him, right? Again, we just have um, a lot of storytelling going on in this environment. From the jump, you can see that we got a statue, we got flowers, we got some heads over here. We have this kind of Da Vinci-esque thing going on here. A painter's palette, more painting equipment, quill, and a chair with a notebook there. To me, this looks like, I mean, obviously it's an artist's residence, right? But it looks like since it's in a castle, it makes me think, is this artist similar to Da Vinci? Was this artist inspired by Leonardo da Vinci? Was he inspired by the idea of something that used to happen a lot in the Renaissance, which is that a king would have a artist on staff, and that artist would live there on the castle at the castle, and would produce various works for the king, right? So that would either be sculptures or it would be paintings and things like that. And we definitely get the sense that this person is, they're down in the dungeon. They're down in their dungeon, which is very relatable to somebody who's an artist, right? You're kind of like in the subconscious, right? The artist draws from the subconscious, and so it makes sense that his place is underneath the castle in a sense, right? And his room is not as well kept, right? So maybe he's to the king a lower priority compared to other people, right? Which again, it kind of sticks with the Leonardo da Vinci motif, which is like a super gifted artist, and you can tell that whoever this is very prolific, right? They have these books over here. Maybe they wrote these books. Maybe these are all their notes. These are definitely maps, not just paintings, but maps. You see some other stuff here. You see this Da Vinci Vitruvian Man here. Clearly not a coincidence. And then you see the paintings, right? Again, now we can contrast this between the two. We can contrast this against the artist environment versus the person who you could say the artist helped render and build this environment, right? We have the main throne room. And what do we see? We see a lot of repeating elements, right? Circles. Look at that. There's those gears again. So what do we have? We have this visual representation that is connected with other elements of the city's design. So these are definitely gears here, right? But there's also three of them. And what's interesting about three, the number three, is that the number three is often associated with divinity. It's associated with God. You think about the Holy Trinity, that sort of thing. So, and then it's also obviously co-opted by people who are in royalty, right? They have the three can signify that as well. But then we see the same kind of pattern repeating here. We have these circular patterns here. And then within those circular patterns, we have this. these patterns that are doing the exact same thing. So we have this checker pattern here, which is pretty cool, right? We've got this checker pattern here. Oops. Let me just, right? We see this checker pattern here that's established. And then we see the same sort of checkered pattern get extended into different directions here and here, and with different patterns, but all triangular, right? So we have this kind of, oh, well, actually, it's more like a diamond, right? So again, we have this kind of connection to a royalty. So we have these circle-like patterns here on the trim of the on the buildings, and then we have these kind of triangular patterns here on the ground. And so this adds a lot of visual interest, but then we see the same sort of diamond patterns here. We see them here. We see them coming off of the light, off of the center. We see the archway here is covered in these kind of diamonds, right? And then here as well, around the arches. Yeah, so you can see how it is that an artist, a team of artists takes these individual shapes and then builds environments around them in order to create something that feels very cohesive. It feels cohesive for the story. It feels cohesive for the vibe it is that they're trying to create. And they're able to take these elements of symmetry and these elements of repeating patterns and repeating shapes, and they're able to explore them with big shapes, medium shapes, small shapes, and use those in different forms of ornamentation, different forms of trim. Again, you just look at the geometry of the environment, and we have a big, medium, small thing going on. This feels very big, right? The overall room feels very big. The trim around here, this kind of rotating wall here, feels very small, right? Again, we have that pattern here. So it's almost like pointing us in this direction, right? All right, guys, that's all it is that I got for you today. If you'd like to support my channel and if you'd like to see some stuff, um, I'm going to be doing some exclusive stuff on Patreon. I'm going to be doing some stuff that's going to be available earlier on Patreon as well that will eventually make it to YouTube. But if you want to support my channel, I got a Patreon. I also have a Discord group for artists that like to draw together, or if you're a game dev and you're looking for an artist and you want to connect with people or you want to chat with me, there's a Discord link in the description box, as well as my website where you can see my work and and I also have my portfolio, my game design portfolio down there as well that you can check out because my website and my portfolio for game design is different. Um, so, anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching my videos. I hope they're helpful. Let me know if there's a game it is that you would like for me to look at next. And in the meantime, have a good day. Take care.